The file hit the table without a sound. No drama, no raised voices, just a thick stack of documents placed in front of senior lawyers on March 25, 2026. And inside it, every private payment, every signed agreement, every hidden detail that had been building for years in silence. This wasn't a warning. It was a line in the sand. Let's talk about what really happened inside that room. Because this wasn't just another quiet royal disagreement. This was a direct challenge, one that cut straight through the heart of the monarchy. At the center of it all stood Prince Edward, the youngest son, often overlooked, rarely loud, never reckless. And across from him, whether directly or through the system, stood King Charles III and Queen Camilla. What many people don't know is how quickly this escalated. It didn't begin with shouting. And it didn't begin with headlines. It began with something far more controlled. Property reviews, quiet audits, internal discussions about modernizing the monarchy. And then one estate became the target. Bagshot Park, a 120-room mansion. 51 acres, deep inside Windsor Great Park. Not just a house, but the living symbol of a title, the seat of the Duke of Edinburgh. But here's the part that made everything dangerous. That house wasn't just given. It was earned, paid for, protected. According to accounts from journalists and insiders, Prince Edward had spent decades quietly building a legal shield around it. A lease signed in 1998. A massive renovation funded largely from his own money. Then, in 2007, a move that changed everything. £5 million paid to extend control over the estate for 150 years. That's not temporary ownership. Now that's long-term power. And suddenly, by 2026, that power was being questioned. Many are questioning how it even got to this point, because on paper it didn't make sense. The agreements were clear, the investments were documented, the rules had been followed, but inside the palace, something had shifted. There was pressure, there were reviews. There were whispers about reclaiming assets, tightening control, and reshaping how the royal family operated. And Bagshot Park became more than just land. It became leverage. But there's more to this story. Because while lawyers were studying property documents, another move was happening quietly, almost unnoticed at first. A palace official arrived with a clipboard, a calm explanation, a routine audit. But the target wasn't land, it was something far more personal, a wedding tiara. The kind of item that doesn't just carry value, but memory. The kind of item that can't be replaced. And when that audit reached Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, it crossed a line that turned a quiet dispute into something much bigger. What happened next shocked everyone involved, because this wasn't just about ownership anymore, it was about trust. And once that breaks inside a family like this, it doesn't come back easily. To understand how things got this far, you have to go back. Before the lawyers, before the audits, before the tension filled those palace rooms. Back to Queen Elizabeth II. What many don't realize is how deliberate she was in her final years. She had seen the shifts inside the family, the growing focus on money, control, public image. She understood exactly where pressure was building, and she made decisions accordingly. That one of those decisions involved the title of Duke of Edinburgh, a title that had defined Prince Philip for over 70 years. There was never confusion about what it meant. But who would carry it next? That's where things get interesting. Unlike the more visible heirs, Prince Edward had spent his life staying out of trouble. No scandals, no headlines, no chaos, just steady work behind the scenes. And that mattered. Royal insiders remember how quietly consistent he was. While others drew attention, he avoided it. While others struggled under scrutiny, he stayed controlled. So when the time came, the decision wasn't random. It was intentional. The title would go to him. And in April 2023, King Charles III made it official. But what many people don't know is that the title wasn't the full story. Because attached to it, carefully, and deliberately, was Bagshot Park, not just as a residence, but as part of the identity, And that connection wasn't casual. According to witnesses, Queen Elizabeth II had signed a letter of intent tying the estate directly to the title. And it wasn't done lightly. It was witnessed by Prince Philip during his final days. That detail changes everything, because it means this wasn't just a preference, it was a protected decision. But then something shifted after she was gone. A different mindset took over. King Charles III had long believed in modernization, streamlining the monarchy, reducing costs, reorganizing structures. On paper, it made sense, but in practice, it created friction. Because modernization often means reviewing what already exists, and sometimes reclaiming it. That's where the pattern began to emerge. And first came financial audits, then lease reviews, then quiet pressure on how royal residences were used. Individually, each step looked reasonable. Together they formed something else, a system tightening control. And then came the warning signs. People inside the palace began to notice. Staff whispered about shifting priorities, about certain households being watched more closely than others. And Bagshot Park kept coming up. Why? Because by then, its value had skyrocketed. From a neglected estate in the 1990s to something worth nearly £30 million. That changes how people look at it. That changes motivations. And slowly, quietly, pressure started building around Prince Edward. But he wasn't unprepared. Not even close. Because while others were just starting to look at the estate's value, he had already spent years securing it. And when the moment came, he was ready. On this particular occasion, everything collided at once. The legal file, the property dispute, the growing pressure inside the palace, and then the tiara. It started as something simple, a visit, a clipboard, a polite explanation about a jewelry audit. But when that audit reached Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, the tone shifted, because at the center of it was one specific piece, her wedding tiara, commissioned in 1999, designed using antique elements from Queen Victoria's collection. Worn for decades as her signature piece, not borrowed, not rotated, hers. And suddenly that ownership was being questioned. The argument came wrapped in legal language. Because the tiara included historic materials, it could be classified as crown property, and that meant it should be held in a central vault and only issued when approved. Simple on paper, but devastating in reality, because it meant one thing. She would have to ask permission to wear her own wedding tiara. That crossed a line, and the reaction was immediate. Accounts from insiders reveal that Prince Edward didn't hesitate. His legal team responded with something decisive, a deed of gift signed in 1999 by Queen Elizabeth II. Clear wording, private ownership, no ambiguity. That should have ended it, but it didn't. Because by then, this wasn't just about a tiara, it was about control. And what happened next pushed things even further. There were threats, quiet but serious. If the claim wasn't dropped, private letters from Queen Elizabeth II could be released. Letters that reportedly contained her true feelings about certain relationships inside the family. That raised the stakes instantly, because those letters weren't just personal, they were explosive. At the same time, another figure stepped in, Princess Anne, and everything changed. No hesitation, no diplomacy. She walked into the situation with a clear position. According to witnesses, her message to King Charles III was direct. If their mother's signed decisions could be undone, then no monarch's word meant anything anymore. That's not a small argument. That's the foundation of authority itself. And she didn't stop there. She reviewed the documents, the lease, the payments, the agreements, and her conclusion was simple. There was nothing left to argue. Edward had paid. The crown had accepted. The deal stood. But even then, the tension didn't disappear, because power inside the monarchy isn't just about law. It's about influence. And that's what made the situation so dangerous. The system itself could still apply pressure, but the full truth was still to come. By the time everything settled, at least on paper, the outcome was clear. The tiara stayed with Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Bagshot Park remained under Prince Edward's control, and the palace quietly stepped back. No big announcement, no public admission, just a formal note confirming what already should have been obvious. But behind that quiet resolution was something much bigger. A shift. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that this wasn't just a dispute. It was a test of power, and the result created two clear sides within the monarchy. On one side, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, pushing for control, structure, modernization. On the other, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, holding the line on what had already been decided. And that divide didn't disappear. It settled in, quietly, permanently. Publicly, nothing changed. Appearances remained polished. Events continued. Smiles were exchanged. But inside, trust had shifted, because one brother had used the law to protect himself from another. And that leaves a mark. The public reaction, according to reports, was mixed, but intense. Many saw it as a simple question of fairness, someone who paid for something defending it. Others saw it as another sign of deeper issues within the institution. Either way, it didn't go unnoticed, and the consequences went beyond the present moment, because for the next generation, especially James, the future holder of the Edinburgh title, this story becomes a lesson, not about tradition, but about caution, that what is given can be challenged, that security isn't assumed, it's built and defended. In the end, what remains isn't just the legal victory, it's the change in understanding. These stories provide insight into something deeper than titles or property. They reveal how power works behind closed doors, how decisions made quietly can echo for years, and how even inside one of the most controlled institutions in the world, nothing is ever as settled as it seems.